food personnel in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is situated on the homelands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. I'm also a regional lead with Farm to Cafeteria Canada for their Canada Digs In Farm to School program. Today's Sea to School webinar is part of that work, so I want to thank Farm to Cafeteria Canada for the opportunity and for their support. Our moderator for today's webinar is Jenn Thornhill Verma, who is a journalist, landscape artist, and author of the book Cod Collapse, The Rise and Fall of Newfoundland's Saltwater Cowboys. So I'll hand it over to Jenn from here to introduce the panelists and get the conversation started.
Thank you so much. As I'm introducing the panelists, we'd love if you took a moment to introduce yourselves. I see a lot of familiar names that are getting me really excited that you've joined today's call. And we're expecting to have 5 panelists on today's call. So we will wait with bated breath to see that our last panelist is able to join. And there will be a recording of today's webinar as well. So feel free to share that through your networks. And there's a bio statement on the webinar as well. You can link to panelists, organizations, learn more about the program. So I'll just give kind of a brief introduction to each of our panelists and ask them to give a wave. Elizabeth Moore has joined us from Haida Gwaii. We're so pleased that she was able to join from British Columbia. She's an Indigenous food gatherer working with schools, hospitals, and the greater community to increase food security. And she's a mother of 3. She's from the Haida Nation. And I think it's tremendous the work that this group is doing. It's part of Nourish as well, which is not only providing local sourced foods to schools, but to hospitals as well. We're going to predominantly talk about the school program today. We also have Jen Lovewell in Monterey Bay, California, a registered dietitian, nutritionist with a focus on sustainable and equitable food systems that encourage both the planet and our people to thrive. She's currently helping run and operate Real Good Fish. I love that name, Real Good Fish, a sustainable seafood company that was started by her husband, Alan Lovewell. Previously, she was the director of nutrition of the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District and one of 8 Fresh Meals at School ambassadors for the state of California. She's also an Innovation Award recipient from the Center for Eco-Literacy, among many other accolades. Dr. Talia Young, we're hoping, can join us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the founder and program director of Fishadelphia, a school-based community seafood program. And she's also a visiting assistant professor in environmental studies at Haverford College. Prior to graduate school, Dr. Young spent 7 years working and teaching in Philadelphia public and charter schools. And you start to see a little bit of a trend line here. A lot of our panelists have some experience teaching in the school environment. So not surprisingly, here we are, Sea to School. We also have Emily Doyle, who's joined us from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, PhD candidate at Memorial University of Newfoundland in the Faculty of Medicine in the Division of Community Health and Humanities. And her work examines Newfoundland and Labrador's school food system. And then last, never least, Kimberly Orren, Petty Harbor, Newfoundland and Labrador, former high school science teacher turned commercial fisherman and co-founder of Fishing for Success, a nonprofit social enterprise that is creating a new pathway for youth of Newfoundland and Labrador and beyond to connect with their fishing heritage. So I'll tell you a little bit about the webinar today. I'm going to stop screen share and get us back into gallery view. This is, as Suzanne laid out very nicely, Sea to School programs, they procure local sustainable seafood for schools, and they also enhance ocean literacy. So we're going to hear about hopefully three of those programs today. Oh, and I see that Dr. Talia Young has joined us. Yay! We're going to hear about 3 of those programs today, but we're also going to question what would it take for a Sea to School program to get up and running in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we're going to see the art of the possible, and we're going to think about the future possible in a place where, quite literally, off your back porch, you have access to an enviable supply of seafood and a real opportunity for youth to learn about sea life and marine life and their future and career related to the ocean. In terms of the structure for today's webinar, we're going to spend an hour in moderated discussion, but do feel free to start posing any questions that you may have. I do encourage you to share in the chat where you're from, what your interest was in joining today's call. We'd love to hear from you as well. There's obviously a lot of expertise on the panel, but there's a lot of expertise in the participants. I know because I know your names. Today's webinar will be recorded and it's going to be shared post-call, as well as if there's any resources that we talk about, we're going to compile those in a blog to share as well. Okay, I'm going to get started with our first question. First and foremost, we would love to hear about these Sea to School programs. And so Jenn Lovewell, I'm going to start with you to tell us about Bay to Tray. So what is it? Who is it for? And what have you seen by way of outcomes?
Great. Well, thanks for kicking it off. And hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So Bay to Tray got started in 2014. And at the time, as Jen mentioned, I was the Director of Nutrition Services at the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District. And we were doing a lot of work in the school meal program to bring a lot of scratch cooking back into the kitchens and train our staff to have the skills in order to cook, prepare large batches of meals with real food versus, a very traditional heat and serve model. And being on the Monterey Bay, a lot of these students were looking at the Monterey Bay in their classroom. And Monterey has a very strong fishing culture and heritage. And then the students would go from their classroom to the cafeteria and eat, frozen reheated fish sticks shaped like dolphins and stars. And as a kind of young idealist and dietitian, I just felt like food was, one of the greatest equalizers for our students in our community, where 7 out of 10 children lived below the poverty line. That they really needed to have, first and foremost, access to fresh, healthy food. And secondly, I think food can be such a great way to connect students to culture, to place, to history, to their community and to each other. So really felt this drive to get some local fish into schools, but it was really difficult. I'm sure we'll get to challenges and barriers later on. But the strongest ones being overall budget for our school meals, and then just the intricacies of access. So while Monterey Bay was a fishing heritage, we have a lot of harbor infrastructure because of commercial fishing regulations. A lot of fishermen have moved on from Monterey, so there really weren't a lot of local fishermen left. There are a lot of aging fishermen, so here in California, the average age of a commercial fisherman is 60. So a lot of fishermen had kind of gotten out of it. And there are also a lot of intricacies in fish buying. So there was just, it was difficult to what I felt was, could be so simple. Had to take some great collaboration and partnerships and creative thinking. And so at that time, I met Lovewell, who turned out to be my husband. So Bay to Tray is kind of how we got connected and a little bit of a love story as well. But we, started to think about this really creatively and how we could do the best thing for our students, and like what would be the best thing for the kids. So worked with some local fishermen to get a bycatch from the black cod fishery. So there was this fish called grenadier that has no market. No one's really heard of it. Super fish markets and restaurants don't serve it because their customers don't know anything about it. But it's this wonderful, really white, light, flaky fish that, is perfect for kids. And because it has no market, most of the time these fishermen were just throwing it back overboard because they would get pennies on the dollar for it. So we started paying them to actually keep that fish versus throwing it back overboard, where a lot of times it was already dead when it was going thrown back overboard. So a perfectly wild, edible, wild food, highly nutritious, that just because it didn't have a market was deemed unworthy, so we started paying them to keep that fish and incorporate it into our school meal program. And as I was sharing on our practice session yesterday, we launched the Bay to Tray program in 2014, as a little pilot program at one of our high schools. And on the first day that we served it, we sold out of all of our fish tacos and sold out more, or saw the students choosing fish tacos over the spicy chicken sandwiches and pizza. So after seeing that, I knew we had something, that was a huge win. So I knew we had something that we could really build upon.
Fantastic. And I should note too that the program was recognized by the Obama's administration's Champions for Change and Sustainable Seafood program too. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Dr. Young, Talia, I want to come to you next to hear about Fishadelphia. Again, what a great name.
I can't take credit for the name, but it's really good to just be able to toss around. And I'm grateful for the young, marketing social media person who helped come up with it kind of on a whim. And I was like, oh, we're going to run with that. So we are a school-based program, but I think really pretty different from Beta Tray in that our goal is to buy seafood from local seafood harvesters. We are, as you might guess from the name, based in Philadelphia. And we buy, and you might also say, wait, is Philadelphia on the ocean? And you would be right, which you're like, oh yeah. So we're about an hour from the Jersey Shore, and New Jersey has a wide and deep variety of commercially fished species. And so we buy directly from harvesters and docks in New Jersey and bring those fish and shellfish into the city. And we work with students at 2 schools right now, where we run after-school programming to run what is similar to a community-supported fishery or a community-supported agriculture program. And our goal is to provide high-quality seafood to culturally and economically diverse seafood eaters in the city. And so we work with students in the schools to provide affordable seafood for our customers. And some of the customers subscribe in advance, the way that some people might be familiar with in a subscription program, but many others also buy week to week by text message, basically, or at farmers markets that are targeted, especially in immigrant communities and communities of color. And we work with our students to run the day-to-day operations of the program. They design the website, they deal with our customer correspondence, they run our social media in, as you might guess, a much more savvy way than certainly I would ever run our social media. And when it's not a pandemic, they also pack up all the fish. In the meantime, we have some adults out packing the fish, and presumably one day we will be back in person with the students. Right now, we do everything virtually. And so, yeah, and I don't know, I'm super interested and excited to talk about sort of what it means to engage students in the day-to-day operations of something, how to engage them with the content, how to engage them with the ideas. I think a thing that feels really important to me about this project is the idea that if we connect these communities, rural, coastal communities, and urban communities, which are not that geographically distant, but are told that we don't have very much in common, but if we connect everyone with a commodity that everyone is interested in, does that have the potential to build connection and potentially build interest and knowledge and solidarity? Another thing I'm really interested in talking about is a thing that feels important to us is being assets rather than deficits oriented. I think that there's a lot of possibility for, well, I think in the food world, there's a lot of hopes and dreams of like teaching people to shop, eat, and cook. And I think one of the underlying ideas for our program is that we are engaging with communities, both on our harvester end and on our consumer end, who have a really deep knowledge about seafood. And one of our goals is to give them access to affordable products to realize that history. And if people want education, then we do that. So we also do doc trips, but what does it mean to focus on the assets, and how do we build programs that do that?
Fantastic. That's a brilliant introduction, and we will definitely come back and talk about engaging community and students as well. Elizabeth, I want to come to you, and I don't think I mentioned it in the introduction, but you and I have a connection that I realize, and I'm so grateful because you've been involved in the Nourish initiative funded by originally the McConnell Foundation, now also the Errol Foundation, and Nourish is becoming its own entity, but you were one of the first cohorts, I think, to put Nourish into practice, which was essentially taking locally harvested country foods and making them available in healthcare settings. it's a brilliant model because it's both efficient, it costs less when you actually provide food to people that they'd like to eat. It's client and family centered. It can be a bridgeway to reconciliation. And of course, it helps to tackle the climate crisis. It's low hanging fruit in many ways, but yet there's many barriers to making this happen. I just wanted to mention that. We'd love to hear about the local Food to School program. What is it, who's it's for, and what have you seen by way of the impacts?
Hadalasis, Dilung Ath Kilagam, Elizabeth Moore Hinu Di Kyan, Di Au Hadagan, Diu Yaku Jangagan, Madalau Hinu Hot Kithkol Kyan, Dilung Ath Kilagam. Good people. Hadalasis is good people, and Elizabeth Moore is my English name. Madalau is my Haida name. Madalau is the leaf of the slugwidis, which is a thimbleberry. It's a sister plant to the salmonberry. And so it's the leaf of that berry. That's my Haida name, one of my Haida names. I forget what your question was, but it's about local foods to school and seafood in the school.
Right
so,
on.
So what, I don't know that I have much information or contribution to what Nourish and what has happened here on Haida Gwaii. I can let you know that I'm a huge critic of how food has become a huge issue in this earth now, and how people are, seeking ways to get food here and there, and yet when Indigenous people welcomed the ancestors of all the settlers that came here, I know what our people did was they put food in front of them. That's the first thing, because that's what I was taught. I worked in we have a school on the reserve, and it's called Chief Matthew School. And it's, in the eyes of colonial people, I guess you would say it's a private school. It's for Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people can attend. But our school here in Old Masset is, I think, one of the best schools in the whole world. I worked there probably about 25 years ago, and I'm a mother of 3 daughters, and we've sustained ourselves from the ocean because we live right, like the house is right in front of the ocean, Masset Inlet, Inlet. And so when I used to work in the school, I would bring seaweed in, and I would dry the seaweed with the children. And then I would bring in the swagen, the sockeye, the most, the fish that's most sought after. And so I had already smoked the sockeye, but I was teaching the children about cutting the fish and preparing it to put it in jars. But I was also telling them how we're not allowed to laugh or make fun of fish, because you know how children can be. They pick up a fish and they want to, chase it, or even adults. But we were informed never to make fun of fish or laugh at fish, because the fish may not ever come back. And that's why if you look at a halibut, I don't know if any of you know what the halibut looks like, a hagu. It's a flat gray, and on the bottom it's white, but his eyes are on one side. And that's because long ago there was a young person who was laughing at the fish, and then that's what happened, is the hagu put his eyes up so that he could see and make sure that he wasn't going to be tormented in any way. So that's what I teach the children is that we have to be so respectful of every piece of fish or food that comes from the ocean and is in our care. And we have to be grateful and thankful. And there's a lot of people who will do a food burning ceremony with our fish. It could be dried salmon, dried cow, Ulikins, we call sow ulikins. They're a fish from the Nishka, and they come from, like, we're on an island, and then we have to go 6 hours on a boat, and then you get to Prince Rupert, and then you drive 5 hours, and you end up in the Nass Valley. And in the Nass Valley, they have ulikins, which saved their lives. I don't know the story about the fish, but I just know that it's a small fish, and it saved their lives. There was no other fish around, and they were able to sustain themselves and keep themselves alive by these little fish. And so what we've done is we've had the trade. We traded our berries and our fish for the ulikins and the grease. The grease was is very helpful for keeping a cold away, or if you have like a chest congestion. The Nonnies always said you got to warm up the grease and eat 2 tablespoons, and you'll sustain your what's it called now? Your system that keeps you healthy. So I also taught Haida language in the schools, and so we would talk about Ew is the seaweed, Skill is the black cod, Kameth is the razor clam, Skull is the butter clam, Swagan is the salmon sockeye, Hagu is the halibut, Gabe is the scallop, and Kostan. So our children know, mostly all the names of the different kinds of foods that we get from the ocean. And when my daughters were in the Gurenge Klotskane, which is our high school, we have a really awesome teacher that works there, Dan Schulbeck, who has done a lot of, he does a lot of gardening, but he's also included a lot of our seafood in the school. So he, at a parent teacher conference, him and the students cooked up Hagu burgers, halibut burgers, and they were the most divine thing I've ever tasted. And then I walked in one time, and he was working on a whole pile of coho right inside his classroom, right on top of the kids' desks. And I, like back then I didn't think about like the food safety, but I was so happy that he was doing that, and the young kids are learning this. And my children, my 3 girls, they're all girls, and they talk about how they're so fortunate that they grew up learning how to do all of this, because all their friends in school don't know how to do this. And that's because of genocide in Canada, and how our families were broken down and people weren't able to pass on this information. They weren't allowed to teach their own children because their children went to residential schools. And so my children are always grateful about this, when it's right now, it's harvesting season. We're getting ready to go, and it will be a time where I have always, fish comes before anything else. It doesn't matter what kind of social event. if there's a death, I just need to work on the fish and make sure that we have enough to sustain ourselves. And it's, you know, for community and family. So, hoa.
Thank you so much. I want to, already you can hear so much about the impact that these programs are having and the interconnection between human and ocean, human and fish and fishing. And I know the people of Newfoundland and Labrador know that very well. And one of the questions that we wanted to address on today's call is, you know, what would it take for programs like this to flourish across Newfoundland and Labrador and elsewhere in Canada? Emily studies in her doctoral work, I should say, at Memorial, some of these barriers. And so we've asked Emily to share with us, from your research, Emily, what have you seen as some of the barriers to undertaking programs like this in Newfoundland and Labrador specifically?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. I'm so appreciative to be involved in this conversation. So how my research contributes to this discussion. My research began in 2012 and my data collection finished in 2016. It included a case study, a survey of school food, school principals, and key informant interviews with 30 stakeholders from the school food system. I look at the school food from a systems view. So school food can be framed by ongoing policies and programs, the social and physical environment, the teaching and learning environment, and community interactions. So considering this frame, we can try to understand the barriers that exist to implementing an innovative fish as food program in schools in Newfoundland and Labrador. So first of all, one of the most influential educational policies that has recently influenced the operation of schools within the province's largest school district, which operates 94% of the schools in the province, was the consolidation of the former school districts, leading to the creation of the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District. So this reorganization had the effect of slowing the adoption of a province-wide healthy school food policy. It also led to the reorganization of key supporting roles for healthy school food policy. Thus, a program related to healthy food in schools, such as offering more fish throughout the entire district, was viewed by stakeholders that I interviewed as being low on the list of priorities and actions that needed to occur to continue on with the day-to-day operations of the province's school system. So second of all, this insight from the policy environment connects to the social and physical environment of Newfoundland and Labrador schools. While there's a unified district which operates the majority of the schools in the province, the regions of the province and each school within those regions exhibits a great deal of variability when it comes to understanding each school's independent food system, including school level policies, school eating environments, food services, the surrounding food system, the ways in which individuals inside the school connect food to learning, and the different partners that the school has. This variability can be considered a barrier to food systems change across the province because there's no one size fits all solution. However, this structure also gives schools the freedom to build localized structures and supports that meet school level needs and goals. So thirdly, regarding the teaching and learning environment as it may welcome or deter engagement with fish and the fishery. It was in conversations with Kimberly at Fishing for Success that I learned how it was much more likely for schools in the province to engage with agriculture as a source of food literacy versus the fishery. In my survey, in which 68 schools across the province responded, 52% had an indoor garden, 50% said they went on farm visits, 40% said they had an outdoor garden, 12% reported berry picking and foraging, and 10% offered fishing opportunities. This is curious, and there's definitely more room for food systems, curriculum, and programs in the province that match up with our natural resources. I want to add a point that this survey was focused on schools within the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District and the Conseil Scolaire Francophone, and there is a need to learn more about food system practices within Indigenous schools in the province. I have heard of a number of examples of programs and learning within Indigenous communities that value teaching children about their cultural connection to the land and to food. Fourth, finally, We have overviewed aspects of policies, the social and physical environment, and the teaching and learning environment that may impact the adoption of Sea to School programs. This leaves community involvement. It was in conversations with organizations like Food First, Fishing for Success, School Lunch, and Kids Eat Smart that I learned of the observation that one barrier for these organizations in offering fish in schools was the number of schools who had allergy bans preventing fish from entering schools. In my survey of schools, I found that 88% of schools had allergy bans in place, with nuts and fish being the most commonly banned foods. I also learned from a health professional in the key informant interviews that allergy bans are not considered the most effective practice, and an observation that children are overdiagnosed with food allergies in this province. This situation provides additional insight into the importance of taking a systems lens when speaking about school food system transformation. So just for the case of fish allergies, if we look at the system of factors that would need to be changed to improve the situation, we need to think about why current policies are in place, the social and physical environment, the teaching and learning environment, and community interactions. In this case, efforts by community organizations to improve connections between the fishery and schools to enhance health, education, and sustainability are sending feedback to the school system that the current policy, which is in place mainly to reduce liability, is having an indirect negative effect on school food systems change. In turn, the lack of resources or the fragmentation of resources within schools makes it difficult for community organizations to change the status quo. This connects to the teaching and learning environment as well, because although there has been a seismic shift in consciousness regarding food systems literacy and society's understanding of the connection between health, the environment, and education, this understanding is not yet incorporated as a mainstream idea of how to teach about food or operate food programs in schools. Finally, perhaps the greatest barrier to an overhaul of the school menu in the province relates to the current normal regarding the industrialization of food in society. Until we are able to put a value on the social and ecological systems that connect to food, there will be barriers to justifying programs that are built on the principles of deepening connections to food systems.
Emily, thank you so much. Can you just clarify for us, so tremendous amount of work that you're doing. When can people expect to be able to see some of that in writing if they want to follow up?
Well, some of it has been published already, and in like it's available to anyone who's interested. If you want to see it in writing, I have it in writing.
Okay, great. Because you spelled out a lot of barriers, and panelists, I am going to come to you to talk about what was what seemed an insurmountable barrier, but that you were able to overcome. I want to start thinking about, as Talia had put it, Dr. Young, the assets-based approach, what can seemingly be a deficit. Okay, maybe that's not something you're going to tackle straight away, but how do you build those assets and create the art of the possible? But first, I want to come to Kimberly Orren, because we haven't heard your voice yet on the call. And I thought, Kimberly, you could help to ground us and just, help to explain, why is this so crucially important, getting seafood on the menus of schools?
Well, I mean, all we have to do is literally take all the stories of all three of the speakers who we heard from at the very beginning and just bundle it up all together to just give a full picture of what our students are missing out on, what our children are missing out on if they're not exposed to fish as food, fish as culture, fish as art, fish as a way to connect to heritage. And so if we think about how humans have connected through time, through fishing as a shared human heritage, we're by leaving our children out on a local food like this, they're missing out on a huge opportunity. Elizabeth spoke to it, and I apologize for using your English name, I'm sorry. Elizabeth spoke to it as a way of introducing the children she works with, to introduce them to their ancestors, to their heritage and their traditions, something that was denied by settlers. And so it's part of reconciliation. Dr. Young spoke of it as a way of connecting inner city youth and inner city communities with outlying fishing communities and bringing people together that way, and bringing local fresh food to fresh food deserts in downtown areas. And Jenn Lovewell has spoke to the amazing thing of being able to use bycatch, which has been a waste. And we all are probably very much aware of this waste that we've just sort of overlooked, that has become built into our industrial food system, and the horror really of that we've just kind of become we just stopped thinking about how life on this planet becomes a waste of a food system that's a gross thing in our industrial food system. So how can we honor those animals and use them as food once again? And so serving up grenadier as delicious food, fish tacos in school systems is really important. So strengthening local food value chains is huge, and developing those local food chains so that we have local food sovereignty is valuable. Those local food skills that children are learning, strengthening their identity in place and connection to nature and ancestors and traditions. The fact that it will contribute again to identity that children have. This is one of those things that young people, it's so important for their formation. Hands-on learning, especially that we see with programming in Haida Gwaii, where the children are actually participating in the creation of their own food. And so this is going to contribute to their selection of healthy foods when they grow up. And I really want to hear a little bit more too about Talia's programming, and if it's a social enterprise, how much the kids are involved in the business end of the project, and how that contributes to their financial learning too. That's an exciting piece of that programming. It's all of this pulled in together becomes this huge learning and connection to ocean literacy, and understanding how humans are connected to the ocean, and how our health and how our well-being is directly connected to the ocean, and not just where our food comes from. And the thing about it is that climate change is this big elephant in the room on every topic of discussion that we should be having. And one of the ways to address climate change is through local food, and really strengthening these local food systems that we have. And one way that we can do that is getting local food into our schools and having children reconnect through those local food systems.
Thank you. That really helps to contextualize, why this is so crucially important and connects in so many ways with community. Talia, I want to come back to you, because you had raised this concept of the assets versus deficits. We just spent some time digging into some of the barriers and, why not to get started. But how did Fishadelphia get started? How did you kind of build on what was there to grow this program?
I tell this story about being at a local seafood conference and somebody getting up and saying, Americans don't know how to eat cod, only know how to eat cod and salmon. They don't know how to eat other kinds of fish. And I was like, I don't think you're talking to the right Americans. Like, there are a lot of Americans who eat a lot of other kinds of fish, whatever. Everybody likes salmon and cod. No one is going to say no to salmon and cod. But I don't know, I was just like, well, there are so many of us who eat other kinds of fish in other forms. We're not white. And I have this, whatever, when I give like talks, I have this slide where I show the fish counter at the Whole Foods, and then I show the fish counter at the Chinese market, and they're really different. So I was like, well, so what would happen, right? Like, is this a possible win-win? Like, or is this a missing market? Like, is it possible that, in fact, immigrant communities and communities of color in the US can hold a key to the solution of sustainable fisheries management and developing small markets for small scale harvesters? Like, is that a thing? I don't know, I'm just curious. And so I wrote a proposal Like, what would happen if we tried this? And then somebody funded it. And then I was like, oh, shoot, now we have to do it. I don't know how to do it, which sort of speaks to the thing about like, right, I'm like theoretically teaching high school students how to run a business, but like I'm a school teacher, right? Like I don't know anything about running a business. And so we're all sort of muddling along together trying to figure out like, I don't know, I was like, well, I guess we're supposed to use QuickBooks. So, you know, we taught a high schooler to run our QuickBooks. I don't know anything about QuickBooks, right? Like, just, you know, so we're all sort of muddling through together, but we have recruited and worked with students who eat a lot of fish and whose families eat a lot of fish. We also work with students who don't like fish. So that's also a thing, but who want to be in the club because they want to learn how to run a business. And I'm like, well, maybe we can figure it out together, but don't think that we know what we're doing over here. So yeah, those are some thoughts. I'm interested to hear other folks' thoughts.
Elizabeth, can I come to you? And the question I had asked Talia was, how did it get started? But as you gave your introduction, I almost want to ask, how did it get restarted? Because you gave that you know, long history and the interconnectedness that existed long before this particular program was here. But how did this particular program bring local hunted, foraged, fished foods back to school and use it as an opportunity to educate children as well?
That's a good question. I'm just I'm so new at this position, but because of I was 11 years old when I was canning salmon in a pressure cooker on a propane stove. And there's so many people I meet and they can't even do that. And I'm just, you know, and I'm not afraid at all. I just get it done. And I'm so grateful for the teachers I had in my life. But and I'm also very, you know, because of genocide and what it's done, I'm not really supportive of the institutions that are still in existence, that still disregard our culture, our families, don't even have a thought about how it impacted my family, you know. My nanny, my grandmother, she was illiterate. She didn't go to school. She only knew Haida language. She would pretend to read, and yet she had passed down to her children, you know, how to work on fish and other food. And then her son, who is my uncle, was also illiterate because he ran away from the people who were coming to take the children. And he was the one that took me out on a boat, you know, a 16-foot skiff to catch halibut. He took me to the river to catch sockeye. He took me to Toe Hill to dig clams. And if he had gone to residential school, how would that have been? Where would my mentor have been, hey? So it's my strong belief we need to educate our families and then the school, because genocide was and has been and still is very difficult for our people. In 2016, I went on a journey with Shelley Crack and Kiku, who were doing the local foods to school. And we had all these professors from the University of Waterloo. And I remember Kiku was just like wanting to talk to me because she needed to get information out, because she needed to get her presentation ready. And I said, I'm not going to participate in work while I'm enjoying the beauty of this. You know, we went along this beautiful terrain with the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan people. And I went to the Morristown one time, and in their interpretive center, I went in there when Mount Polly breached. There was a mining company, and it breached all the sludge into the river where the sockeye ran, and the sockeye, and it was going to affect us. So I took my young girls, they were in school then, and I said, we're going to go on a educational journey after we did all our fish up for the season. And I took them along, and I'm fortunate that I have a lot of friends along that, on our way to Vancouver. And we stopped in the Stalaco Reserve, and my friend was, they just built a community smokehouse, and they had just took their fresh smoked sockeye out of the smokehouse, and they're having a salad. And it was the doctors and the community members got together, and they had this beautiful meal. And so I was so grateful looking at that salmon, because the breach had just happened. So I was trying to get to the place where that breach happened, but I didn't get there, but I was able to eat really good salmon. But we went to the Morristown Interpretive Center, and they talked about how the government blew up that river 2 times to ensure that the Indians did not sustain themselves. They did not sustain themselves, and yet they're still living. And that, thank God, that river still produces fish, eh? So I think my journey now is to share the injustices that happened, and how I don't have to apologize for it, but I'm saying I want an apology. Like I want some kind of an attention, some type of, okay, we did something wrong, let's do something to fix it, and let's work together. But I don't want to work together until I get some kind of an acknowledgement that, yes, we did something wrong. And I share that with people that I talk to all the time. I share the stories with friends and family, because it's just disheartening to know that, 1950 wasn't long ago, and to blow up the river so that they wouldn't survive, that, it's disheartening. And so I'm really proud. My daughter is a marine biologist, and she's here. She lives on Haida Gwaii, and we're always fighting because our clam beds, we can't go out and dig clams because they say the clams aren't ready. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Because they're always saying red tide. But my daughter always brings me back to the climate change, the water temperature is different. And she talks to me, in her lingo about what has to be accomplished. Hey, so that's part of my learning, my sharing. It's disheartening that Department of Fishing stops the Haida people from selling their fish and their byproduct. A man, he doesn't have a job. We have 80% unemployment here. He doesn't have a job. So what he does is he goes out on his boat and he brings in his fish and he sells it on Facebook. But he gets harassed by DFO. And I don't know if this man has children, but if he's being punished for that, how is that affecting his children? And how is that affecting his children when they go to school, And because children know everything, they talk about it at school. So that's what I have to share. Hawa.
Thank you. I think what's so fascinating about what you're sharing, I mean, for context, and I know people are aware of this, but it bears repeating that, Canada is a country of coastlines, the longest on the planet. And the magnitude of that is only overshadowed by the knowledge of its coastal keepers and its coastal peoples. And yet, when it comes to decisions about how fisheries are managed, often, you do hear that people with boots in boats in harbors that are affected directly by those decisions don't feel that they're adequately involved. And I think that's what we're hearing. The other thing I'm hearing too is that fish in schools, there's so many aspects to this, the nutritional aspects certainly, but this is really a foodway, an entry point to really getting back to roots and addressing fundamental structural deficits and barriers, and to use the word genocide too. I mean, absolutely, these are entry points to be able to have these deeper, meaningful conversations. We have about 5 minutes, and I want to make sure that before we move over to the Q&A, because we're going to have plenty more to say, I just cue to participants to please take an opportunity. If you have a question now, go ahead and add it to the chat, and we'll come and field those questions. I'll also ask our panelists if they have questions for one another. For now, just given we have about 5 minutes, can I ask each of you to give thought to, we've talked about a lot in this 1 hour. Can you think about what you'd like to see by way of the future possible for specifically Sea to School? What would you like to be able to see in the programs you're currently running, or in what is possible, for example, in Newfoundland and Labrador? So Kimberly, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come back, Jenn, to you, Talia, Elizabeth, and Emily. I want to round out with you as well. So Kimberly.
Well, we haven't had much success in bringing fish or sea to school, as you know. That's one of the reasons why we're here, of course. We have been partnering with other nonprofit organizations to provide access to fishing and fish. Association for New Canadians, First Light, Choices for Youth, and other nonprofits to provide people who are marginalized by the current system and give them access to really transformational experiences of fishing. Because when you go out on the water to go fishing, it's not just an economic activity. We tend to think of fishing as recreational or commercial, and we're leaving out so many other beautiful things in between. It's a real, as I said, it's we think about the way we describe religion, it's put into the terms of fishing. And we think about all of the art and the music that's been created over time, and it's oftentimes inspired by our experiences on the water or in a boat or fishing. And there's so much more to this activity than just getting a commodity. And so my future possible is to get children into boats on the water and recreating as much for children here in Newfoundland and Labrador, what Elizabeth is providing for her children in Haida Gwaii. And so that's my future possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Jenn, over to you.
I think what I would love to see is these programs really putting students and kids and children first. I think a lot of times we are setting up these systems to protect adults or make adults comfortable. So when launching Beta Tray in our community, there were a lot of challenges and a lot of barriers, but it always came back to what do the kids deserve and how do we figure this out for the kids? Because they deserve the best, and they deserve to eat well, they deserve to have a connection, they deserve to really celebrate and understand the importance of food in their lives. And so I think that's my hope, is that programs like Beta Tray can kind of become a example, not just a special occasion, but a way of feeding kids and creating connections within community every single day, every single meal.
Thanks so much, Jenn. Talia.
I mean, I just want to be back in the schools. I mean, right, we all do. This is a thing. Yeah, I guess, wait, I had another thought that I wanted to share. Okay, so I have a degree in fish, so I like fish. But I also, like, I'm much more interested, I like fish for themselves, but I'm much more interested in fish as a vehicle for justice. And I don't know, hearing today, and Elizabeth, hearing about your direct and personal and cultural relationship to the fish makes me think about, I mean, I think this is a thing that we also do, but that I think that our cultural relationships to fish are really important for those of us who are settlers also, because it highlights our migration paths and how we have come here and what does that mean. And right, and I think that fish is one vehicle that can get us to think about those things. I don't think it's the only vehicle, right? So like, I think that, you know, we could choose other ones too, or in addition, but I'm interested in thinking about that, and I don't know. So those are some thoughts I have for now and the future, apart from being with kids again in schools or with other humans again in general.
Yes, we wish that for all of us to be able to be back in schools. Elizabeth.
Brain food, that's what we call our fish for our children. I have 5 granddaughters, so it's really hard with my children. I used to just put it in front of them and put the ullican grease on the potatoes, and then they, you know, like, I just say it's butter. I didn't tell them it was ullican grease, because ullican grease is a real strong tasting food, or it's just a really strong, so, but I haven't done that to my granddaughters yet. And I would just say, just do it, like, just get it done. I did a seaweed camp or harvesting day. I got some boats and I took 8 adults out there and I put them out. They had never picked seaweed before. They didn't know how to dry it, but I sent them out there with these people who knew how to do it. And then they came back in and they were so grateful, like 8 adults. And so when the children learn something, it's even more valuable, because they're just like they just eat it all up. And so they were just, you know, but the adults, like, when they were looking at me and they said, oh, that's just so great that you taught me this. I've never done it. And I really, you know, they really appreciated it. So I think just do it, just get it done, because, you know, we need to, I know, because we have such a high percentage of Haida children in our school. We just need to assert it and get it done, and not abide by all these different rules and regulations. Like I always say, my ancestors knew and I learned from them. So it's just gonna have to happen. So how very much for today.
Well put. Emily, I want to round out with you before we move on to Q&A. Future possible.
So I think this conversation for me is, I guess, the most hopeful future possible, because there are so many like important perspectives and conversations happening at the same place that I think is essential for the future of sea to school in this province. I tried to look far back into our province's history to understand what school has been. And certainly what we have now is a reflection of the history of this province. So I don't think there has ever been a more enlightened conversation as to the necessity to connect food systems to social, environmental, and educational needs. And this is an exciting time, and this is an important conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily. So we're going to turn to Q&A. And I just have to say, if you haven't looked at the chat, it's so exciting, because the people who are working in the school lunch programs and the school cafeteria programs, I mean, they're on this call, right? They have the ability and are actually working on this. So I want to reference some of that in a moment. But Suzanne, did you want to mention anything before we go into kind of the informal Q&A?
I just wanted to mention, you can put your questions in the chat box here right now for the Q&A, but if you do have sort of more complicated questions that require an email, you want to know more about sea to school or farm to school programs or other school food initiatives, you can email me at suzanne@foodfirstnl.ca.
Okay, great. And we have a question here from Samantha, who's in Jacksonville, Florida, and she mentions that they have the St. John's River to fish from the Atlantic Ocean as well. And she had a question, Jen, for you specifically, that you brought up Blackwell, a good but unknown bycatch. And she wondered if anyone knew if there are any other initiatives to look for valuable bycatch. So we'll start with you, and then to our panelists, if you had insights on this, I'll ask you to just give me a cue. So Jen.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the bycatch is called grenadier, and it's caught as bycatch with the black cod fishery. And I don't know off the top of my head other initiatives, but they're out there. You know, I think that is one of the problems with our industrial food system is it's given everything a value. You know, it's given wild food and everything a specific value for what things are worth, and they're all in the same playing field. You know, in the wild, they're food. They're not more one food isn't more valuable than the other. They all provide nutrition. So that's what I love. What we're doing here at Real Good Fish is kind of creating our own value system for wild food, and not just playing by the rules of what the traditional markets have set. So I know here in at Real Good Fish, we deliver over 60 species throughout the year to our customers, and you would never see that kind of variety in a grocery store or restaurant. So the fish are out there. You know, there's plenty of fish in the sea, but we love introducing them to people because they don't know how much they might love them until they're given the opportunity to try. And same things with kids. They don't. You know, a lot of people said kids don't like fish. They won't eat that, but. And, you know, you give them the opportunity to try, and then amazing things can happen. So I'm interested to hear from another panelist if they know of other bycatch programs happening out there. But I think it's a win-win, you know, especially, you know, the concerns around overfishing and bycatch. But if you can create value out of that bycatch and offer commercial fishermen additional value for their catch where traditional buyers are not, it's a win for the community, it's a win for the fishermen, it's a win for the oceans. So I think it's a really good thing to look into.
Thanks so much, Jen. Talia, before you head out to teach a class.
I was going to say, we buy a little bit of bycatch, although I think it's different. We're not creating a market for a species for which there isn't a market. It's more that, like, we have a lobster fisherman who, you know, primarily fishes for lobster, but then sometimes he gets small quantities of random species of fish in his traps, and they're federally managed species. We can buy them, so we buy them. And, you know, sometimes the doc will call and be like, hey, we have some eels, do you want them? And I'm like, yeah, we can move your eels. So we can move any of it. And I think differently, like in most, you know, in some cases we are introducing people to new species, but again, oftentimes our customers are like, oh my God, we have been waiting for this. Why have you not had it anywhere else? And so there's that. So, I mean, I think in some ways the bycatch for us is sort of opportunistic by gear rather than like creating a new market for a species. And this is sort of this question of, what is bycatch? What does it mean to have a market for something? What does it mean to build a new market for something? What does it mean to build a flexible program that can handle unexpected fish, right? Like, I mean, we bought like this mess of 3 different kinds of fish, and now we have a system that can sort of handle it. But I think in many cases, figuring out how to build that system is I mean, it's interesting, but it's non-trivial. And I am super interested in the rest of this, but I have to go teach. But
yes.
I'd be so happy to talk more. Anyway, you can find us on the interwebs.
We will circulate that with the recording for the call. Thank you so much. I do want to just reference Chris Peters, I think had to jump off the call, but he mentioned that he runs the Farm to School program at St. Bonaventure's College in St. John's. And he's reaped a lot of information from today's conversation. And he makes the point that, you know, cultural shifts, so in this case, getting seafood on school menus, demands that people be stubborn. champion positions that don't fit the everyday. And I see, Jen, you nodding about that. And I think, you know, the best predictor of future behavior is very often past behavior. But how do you just sort of champion a new approach? What does that look like? Jen, it looks like you're ready to talk, and Elizabeth, I'd like to ask you about that as well, because you had referenced, you know, there are rules, but you take your cues from your ancestors and elders, and you know, there's something in here about if you want a future possible, you really do have to be steadfast in how you get there. So Jen first, and I'll come back to Elizabeth.
Yeah, and I'm just laughing because I think that he summed it up really well. So I think, you know, I've mentioned a few times that there were challenges and barriers, but when putting kids first and their best interests, I think everything's figure outable, you know, so anytime there is a challenge, yes, food safety, we have to pay attention to that and understand it, but let's figure it out, you know, let's acknowledge it, you know, and make sure we're, you know, serving the kids in a way that's not going to harm them, you know, do the most good. But what's going to do the most good? Is it going to be, okay, food safety, everyone's more comfortable with a frozen reheated fish stick, but is that really doing the best thing for the kids? And I mean, food safety wise, it's, I think that, you know, we were working a lot with the staff. So, you know, Beta Tray didn't happen overnight. It was a lot of building up to really getting our staff in the kitchens comfortable with food and real food again, but they also cook, you know, raw beef at home, or they all have second jobs in a restaurant where they're preparing raw chicken all the time. So they know how to do this. And we serve people food that was, you know, not from a package all the time. So let's just apply the same things we know to the schools, and so that we don't just treat that as a barrier and shut it down. But yeah, I think everything's figure outable, and you just have to slowly see where the resistance comes from people and get them on your side. You know, we also brought fishermen into the classrooms to really get the teachers buy-in into the program and kind of bring that systems change to so the kids are getting the inspiration and the understanding in the classroom and that connection to a fisherman. And then they get to go to the cafeteria and eat local fish. So it really is creating those lasting connections that really cement that as, you know, what we were hoping to inspire, and hopefully inspiring, you know, 1 or 2 kids to become commercial fishermen themselves through that. But yeah, I think, you know, just really helping to get adults comfortable with the idea, and not just letting the easy barriers shut things down, but continuing to bring people along, you know, get them excited and get them to see the kids excited, because, you know, a lot of adults would say, oh, that's not going to work, kids won't like it. But then once you see kids devouring local fish and, you know, writing thank you notes to their local fishermen, you know, it's hard to continue to shut it down.
Thank you. Elizabeth, can I come back to you?
Oh, okay. What was the question again?
Sorry, I had shared a gentleman's response to this from St. John's, who runs his cafeteria program, and he had talked about, look, if you want to get this done, you just got to be stubborn and you just got to get on with it. So I wanted to know, you know, sounds like you identify with that, and you could share some tips on the how to get on with it.
Oh yes, how to just get it done, just do it. Hey, what I noticed is previous to me joining the team, I know that the nannies, like our grandmothers, were going into the school, and they were teaching, you know, how to fillet, how to make jelts, dried fish. So having them in the school is so important. Having the old people teach us is I think one of the wisest things we can do. And like, I really appreciate our Nonalung our grandmothers and grandfathers, because they've taught us so much, and we just have to identify who they taught because we don't always know, there's only a handful of us, but not everybody knows them. As my children would say, they felt so privileged because they grew up knowing, how to, like my daughter was 11 and she was cleaning sockeye like wee hours of the morning until wee hours of the night. And so she already learned from me, we don't do nothing but work on fish when the fish come. We just got to get things done. So yes. Hoa.
Yes. And I just want to say on the theme of getting her done, that the founder of the Fish Market app is on the call, and she has shared the link, and it's an app that reconnects local fishers to consumers in Newfoundland and Labrador, holds huge potential, right, in what that can achieve. So you've got the people that are getting on with it that have joined today's call, which is so exciting. I want to switch things up because we had asked our panelists to share a photo that represented the work that they do. So Kimberly, can I put you on the spot and share your photo first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's do it. Here's the obligatory moment while I try to make this work. You got it?
Yep, I can see it. So this is a picture from our youth Cod Fishery program. And this illustrates some of what I'm saying about the importance of getting young people out on the water and as a component of experiencing fish and fishing. And as I mentioned, we work with urbanized youth who, the biggest thing they may have to do might be climb stairs. They may not have trees in their front yard. Many of them have never been in a boat before, even though they live in Newfoundland and Labrador and are surrounded by water. And so the youth cod fishery kids participated in an 8 to 10 week program during the summer, coming out once a week on Tuesdays for about 3 to 4 hours. And they would learn heritage fishing skills from our elder. And one of the things they did was repair our traditional wooden boats. What you see is a dory flat there. That one does happen to have an engine on it. And once they repair the boats, then, of course, they're going to get in them and then go fishing. And you can see the young man who's in the boat. He's sitting very still and he's got his arms crossed in front of him. Dories are inherently wobbly, and so he's not moving. She's climbing down, this young girl now has to climb down about a 10-foot, what's called fishing stage. So she has to climb down this 10-foot stage and onto a floating pier there on the water and climb into this floating wobbly dory. And so this is the first time that these young people have done this, and it's a pretty big deal. And every time one of them then gets into the boat, we all clap and cheer. And it just builds a lot of confidence in their own ability, because how many of us repair a wooden boat and then our lives literally depend on the work that we've done when we get in this wooden boat and then go out on the North Atlantic? Like, we don't have that opportunity anymore, especially as young people. So it's this whole thing to go out and get out on the water and give young people this confidence that they need, that they're able and capable of doing amazing things. So that's part of our programming, and we're looking forward to getting fish in schools and expanding this so that more young people can experience this.
Jen, I'm going to turn to your couple of photos. There's those famous fish tacos you spoke of earlier, I think.
Yeah. So this first one here is, our fishermen in the classrooms component. And I just love this photo so much. Such a great fisherman. That's Ernie. And he fishes herring outside of the San Francisco Bay. But just seeing too the student and his eagerness, they're so engaged. So I and you can see on his little presentation there, I think he's teaching the kids about all the different fish and wildlife and, shellfish and, foraging that can happen just right outside, not too far from where these kids live in a very urban environment. So while you can't always take the kids out to the ocean, you can bring a lot of that romance and inspiration and important knowledge to them. And then, yeah, those are our tacos. And I just love this image because I love seeing the hands preparing the food. You know, I think that's such a special, important part of preparing fresh food for kids, is the loving, the love that goes into it. And it's a craft, you know, it's an art. So I think that's a really important thing to capture. And then just seeing the freshness and, you know, having, you know, both the fresh fish and the vegetables, you know, the coleslaw prepared from scratch, but just really seeing, and also starts to give a little bit of that idea of the scale at which our schools operate. You know, they're preparing 500 of these at a time. So that's just, it's a feat every single day to feed these kids. And I think a lot of times that isn't really acknowledged in the school districts of what goes into feeding kids, especially when you're doing it with a lot of love and a lot of freshness. So those are my two favorite photos of Beta Tray.
Fabulous. Thank you for sharing those. And unfortunately, we don't get to hear about Talia's, but I did want to show you their fabulous logo and swag. But Elizabeth, we did curate a couple of choice photos from the local Food to School program website on Facebook. I will say, if people check that out, there are tremendous photos of kids and adults alike, but a lot of kids, just clearly a lot of energy out there doing the foraging and sorting and learning these canning skills. So these were the photos that we had shared, but if you had shared one, maybe what photo would you have shared with us to kind of show us what the program offers?
I would have showed you a picture of Sheila Rogers and I working on sockeye. Do you guys know who Sheila Rogers is? CBC? She does books, eh?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, so she came here to Haida Gwaii for literacy, Haida Gwaii, and I had some salmon. And so she was helping me cut it in strips for the smokehouse. And it was really raggy because I had dull knives. And then I was getting it ready for the brine, and I gave her the potato and I said, you got to put this in your mouth and you got to chew it. And when it's done, when you're done chewing it, and if you taste the salts, like this is after the potato came out of the brine, then it's ready. The brine is ready. And so Sheila Rogers, she kept the potato, took it home with her and said, I still have that potato. But it would have been a picture of her and I and my late mother-in-law working on salmon. And it was really raggy. But if you look at the bottom of this picture, this is, it looks like it's either white spring salmon, the fish in the jar, and then the meat is our deer meat, and these are butter clams that he or she is holding in their hand there, and the garden is probably looks like our community garden in Olmasset.
Yeah, I was salivating going through photos. There was so much selection, but thank you for sharing that story. And I'd encourage you, if you wanted to share the photo, maybe Food First Newfoundland and Labrador could share it, post on their blog. That sounds amazing. Jen's asking, are they canning the deer meat? So who's involved in doing that canning?
Yeah, they are canning the deer meat, and it's most likely Charlotte Marks who works in the school. She's been there for a while, and she's another great food harvester, and probably the cooking class, or some students who are maybe Dan Schulbeck's class as well, because he does a lot of that math work with canning in the schools.
Wow, it's amazing how a bottle of meat there can elicit a lot of emotions. I immediately think of my dad and bottled moose meat. So it's amazing. It just kind of like boop, emotions right there. Suzanne, I think maybe now might be a good time if we mention, folks would have seen that if anyone who registered will be automatically entered to this draw to receive either, so 2 lucky recipients would receive 1 copy of the book or a limited edition print. Suzanne, did you want to mention anything else insofar as where to from here with today's webinar?
Yeah, so in addition to this, we'll send it out. We're going to be sending out an email with the link to the recording of the webinar. And when we do that, we'll also send out the name of the lucky winner. Also, when we figure out how to collate the names and do the draw, which is an important step in that. We'll also be putting together a follow-up blog that will have, if any resources were mentioned today or like further reading, things like that will be gathered, as well as the link for the webinar will be on the blog post as well. And I should mention, I don't know when it exactly will be happening, but we're sharing some of the recording with Jane 80 at CBC that she'll be using for one of her radio programs as well. So that's pretty cool.
That is very cool. And I think for folks who don't know, the broadcast is one of, if not the longest community news programs in all of North America. It does a tremendous job of continuing to cover fisheries. Was originally called the Fisheries Broadcast, and certainly hasn't lost the fisheries in becoming the broadcast, much to do with host Jane 80. So that's so exciting. I'm glad to hear that. It's like when you hear Sheila Rogers, the Newfoundland and Labrador, you hear Jane 80, you know. We have 5 minutes, so panelists, give a cue. I'm sure that you've got thoughts bubbling up to the surface. Anything you'd like to add before we close? Questions you have for fellow panelists? Don't be shy. I know you're not.
I forgot to mention a really important part of our culture is reciprocal. We always give. We don't expect anything in return, but part of our culture is always to give back. And so I'm a Raven, and if there's something that an Eagle person has, and if I like it and I say it 3 times, they have to give it to me, but then I have to give them back something nicer, equivalent or nicer than what they gave me. But that's how it is with food too. We always give back to whoever gave us something.
I love that. I love that reciprocity and this idea of food as this barometer in many ways for nurturing relationships and giving thanks and gratitude. Anyone else want this coveted last minute?
I did want to ask, I had it written down, to understand from the panelists their observations of how young people are understanding problems with sustaining the fishery. So whether that be, in Newfoundland, we have the moratorium of the codfish, and I don't know what the situation is regarding children's understanding of that situation or the degree to which they care about that situation. So I'm interested to know your observation of how children that you're working with are sensitive to the fragility of the fisheries today.
Do you want to go to Jen, maybe Elizabeth, then Kimberly? And I think, gang, that will close us out, but great question, Emily. Jen.
Sorry, can you repeat it? I was chatting.
I think Emily, you've asked to what extent do the programs kind of broach an awareness about sustainable fishing? So the sustainable part in particular, and she was referencing the East Coast cod fishery collapse in Newfoundland and Labrador, which is still top of mind because you've got a population of fish that continues to not thrive some 30 years after that fishery is under moratorium. So to what extent is your programming kind of broaching that topic of sustainability?
Great question. I think, we have in our program, we have a limited amount of time and space to connect with kids, and they're largely elementary school students. That's where a lot of our programming is happening. And so first and foremost, we're trying to teach them to celebrate and honor the fish and the ocean and the people that bring it to them. And so I'd say that's what, we aren't really getting into the intricacies of fish stocks and fisheries and sustainability, but more teaching them to love the fish, love the oceans, and so that they, therefore want to conserve it. So yeah, we aren't getting, really deep into topics around sustainability, but more about trying to inspire that love and appreciation, and then therefore, sustainability and the students wanting to protect that comes with that. But it has to start with not just teaching them these things and kind of that top-down approach, but how do we inspire a lifelong love and appreciation of the fish, the oceans, and the people that bring it to them.
Well put. Elizabeth, can you speak to that in terms of how the work that you're doing broaches this topic of sustainable fishing or sustainability?
Well, I think I'm hopeful that even though there's been genocide and family disconnection, that they're still learning it from home about the values of us not making fun of fish or discarding it away in, like, because I don't like it. Like, we're allowed to not like it, and we're allowed to say that it's something I don't want. We're just not allowed to make it a big part of ourselves. And so and I'm also really proud of the fact that my daughter is a marine scientist, and I'm always bugging her about not understanding why I can't go get my razor clams. And so she shares that fragility of the fisheries. And there's like 3 or 4 her age, they're in their early 20s, and they're marine biologists, and they're Haida, and they've lived here all their lives. And so they've been able to go to the land, and they've been able to, understand scientifically, and they also understand culturally. So I think they're going to be like major icons in the years to come. Hoa.
It absolutely instills massive hope. You feel the future's here, and it's not yet evenly distributed, but just wait till these 20-year-olds show up and show us how it's done. Kimberly, coveted last word, and then we're going to close today's call. So over to you on sustainability.
One of the central messages that Fishing for Success teaches is the value of the individual fish and to its ecosystem, and that fishing has to be sustainable, and it should be one fish at a time, and that fish are beings and part of the ecosystem, and that they feel pain, and that if we are going to eat them, we have to humanely and quickly kill them, and that we shouldn't waste them. And the community of Petty Harbor Maddox Cove has had a hand line or a hook and line only fishery for commercial fishing of cod. And that's been an important message when looking for a place to start a nonprofit to teach kids to fish. So there's no gill net fishing within the traditional fishing grounds of Petty Harbor. So that's been an important central piece. And so passing on those kinds of one fish at a time message has been really important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And on cue, the dogs are on. Thank you, guys. That does adjourn today's call. And maybe I'll just say quickly, thank you to Farm to Cafeteria Canada, Food First NL, Fishing for Success, all of our speakers, Elizabeth, Jenn, Talia, Emily, Kimberly, Danica behind the scenes, Suzanne, who kicked us off. Thank you for joining us. That was so invigorating. And now I'm starving. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.